What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Robin's Perspective. I'm Jay, the Reformed Dude. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got two people who I just met, but these guys are awesome. I've been interacting with them a lot on social media, particularly one of them. I think Tim has been the one that has been interacting with me the most. Please welcome the guys from Reconstructing Christianity, Tim and Kendrick. How you guys doing?
Oh, I'm great.
I'm doing good.
Good to have you guys. And
Yes,
so,
good to be here.
absolutely. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to introduce yourselves properly. So, I don't know who wants to go first, but whoever wants to just give us a quick sort of 1 minute testimony, maybe 2 minutes if you need to. It doesn't have to be 1 minute, but a 1 to 2 minute testimony on how you came to Christ, what you do, who you are, that kind of thing. So, who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Kendrick.
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Kendrick. Basically, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and over time, various lukewarm denominations. I came to faith whenever I was 18, and ever since my conversion, I've been reforming more and more. So that's basically my testimony.
Cool beans, man. All right, Tim, you're up.
Yeah, as for me, nothing spectacular or crazy. I grew up in the independent fundamental Baptist church movement. I was saved at a young age. My father used to read me Bible stories before I would go to bed. And at that point, I was like 3, and he led me to the Lord. So I've been saved from fairly early on and raised in the church. Um, haven't always lived like it. My faith didn't really click for me until I went to college. And at that point, I discovered, the Reformed doctrines and post-millennialism, Calvinism, all those things. So when I did, that's when my faith really clicked for me, and I kind of moved out of the independent fundamental realm. Although I don't hate them. I think a lot of them are good-hearted, but a lot of them are just really off on a lot of issues. So
Fair enough. I think we could, even if we are not post-mill, I think most people can agree with that. Independent fundamental Baptists. You have a lot of good people in there. When I say good, Jesus, no one is
yeah,
good, I know. But from a human standpoint, I think you have a lot of faithful believers in IFB churches, but just a little intense. You know what I mean? Just a
hmm
little intense. But good brothers. Even if they consider us Calvinists heretics, you guys aren't heretics. You guys are just wrong on a lot of things. That's all.
Well, hey, some of them are though. The KJV
Well,
only. The if you're a Calvinist, you're going to hell. All right, that's probably heresy.
let me tell you something. I would even be hesitant to automatic. I mean, maybe because
Sure,
there are other things that sure I would have to ask them more questions. I would have to ask them more questions about what they believe and why. But I would hesitate to automatically default to heresy. To me,
sure,
some people say, well, it's not all heretics are going to end up in hell. To me, it's like if you're a heretic and you don't repent, you are ending up in hell. So that's why I'm not willing to go that far. To me, heresy is just being outside of the fundamentals of the faith.
sure.
They got me saying fundamental.
Ah,
You see that? I didn't
You
even do that
dang
on purpose.
fundamentalist.
The essentials of the faith, excuse me. But anyway, we're not here to talk about IFBs. We're here to talk about you guys and what you guys do. So you guys have a page, as I mentioned already, called Reconstructing. Bro, I cannot say that word. Reconstructing Christianity. Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about what your page is all about?
Tim, you want to go first?
okay, I'll go. Well, it kind of started, at least for me, out of frustration, which maybe wasn't the best way to start a page. But it really started when I started going through my post millennial cage stage, which I think I'm out of now, hopefully, but I still strongly hold to it. But I was kind of frustrated at just situations I was in, people not understanding what I was saying because I came out of the fundamental movement, right? So most of the circles I run in were the fundamental guys who really just weren't familiar with other views, especially when it comes to eschatology.
Mm.
So I wanted to start a podcast because I would make these Facebook posts and people would get upset. And I think part of it was they couldn't hear my tone, they couldn't see facial reactions. And the nature of social media is you get like these bite-sized snippets.
Mhm.
Whereas in a podcast, you can give a long form example of what you're saying. So I thought, most of my friends came out of fundy churches. So what better way to reach them with some reformed theology than just putting our thoughts out there? And that's really what the page and the podcast came from.
Gotcha. Okay. And by the way, I'm just curious. I know I've seen you guys do like Facebook Lives once in a while. That's correct.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that like a consistent thing or?
The lives aren't. We usually pre-record our podcasts and upload them. The
Mhm.
lives are more for just when we want to do something silly, like watch a bad debate and react to
Okay.
it, or something like that.
Fair enough. All
Or
right.
be forced to watch a bad movie.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's excellent. I mean, I've caught like one or two of them. I've always found it very entertaining. Usually while I'm working, believe it or not, is when I'm listening to you guys. So
Mhm.
I actually have. I apologize. I haven't heard your podcast. I have watched the Facebook Lives though. Those are very good. So I enjoy those. Okay, cool. So tell me a little bit about what you guys talk about in terms of your podcast. Like, what is it that you're covering?
Oh, go ahead, Kidrick.
Well, we've been basically talking about sort of post-millennialism. We talk about Christian nationalism and try to get the Reconstructionists and the CNers to kind of come together and try to work together for a better state, for a better culture that we can actually be Christian in, you know.
Okay.
And let's see,
We
and we
also, we address a lot of deconstruction in the culture and the church.
Mm.
Actually, our coming up season is on gender roles, which I think is like the where you can pinpoint deconstruction. It always seems to start there. So that's really where we're going. But in the past, we've just addressed those types of issues.
Mhm.
Cool. Cool. And so you guys would consider yourself Christian Reconstructionists.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Although
Okay.
some of the Reconstructionists wouldn't consider us because we're not hardline theonomists. We're more of the general equity theonomist
Mm,
flavor.
yeah.
So a lot of them get mad at us for that, but I like the word, so I'm going to use it.
Or
Yeah,
they
I've seen. Well, I'm sorry, Kendrick. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
or they get mad at us for wanting to read Stephen Wolf's book and try to say, look, it could be we can have a balanced approach to this as well. So
You know what's funny? I'm not a huge fan of Stephen Wolf. I mean, I think that he gets the problem correct. I think he gets that correct. I don't know if I agree with his solution, and we can probably talk a little bit more about that later. But I
Sure.
definitely think that he gets the problem correct. And so, I would not consider myself a wolfist, I guess you could say, Christian nationalist. Uh, but general equity theonomy. Sure, I'm down with that, man. And the
Mhm.
Reconstructionists, I get what you're saying. They kind of get mad at me about that a little bit.
Yeah.
That's okay. I tell them, listen, you guys may not want me, but you've got me whether you like it or not. So,
Mhm.
so we get along. Well, I get along with them. They don't get along with me, but that's okay. I'm gonna be their friend anyway. I'm like Urkel. You guys remember Urkel? I don't know if you guys
Oh, of
are old
course.
enough. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm
Barely
always
old enough.
they're the Winslows. I'm constantly visiting them, and they want me out of their house, but I'm staying. So,
That's how I feel sometimes too.
so why don't you guys tell us a little bit about what is Christian Reconstructionism? Right? Is that obviously it's you guys said that it is something that you would describe yourselves as, but I think there's a lot of people out there that still don't even know what that is. So, if you guys could break that down for us.
You want me to go,
um,
Kendrick?
Rock,
sure, and
paper, scissors for it, guys.
go ahead.
Okay. Well, For a simple definition, I would say Reconstructionism is postmillennialism and theonomy applied to the public sphere. So it comes in where all the Reconstructionist writers were trying to address social issues in the United States and talking about, reconstructing society based on the law of God, or as Joe Boot would say, the law word of God. So as far as a simple definition, that's what I would say as far as what Reconstructionism is.
Okay, fair enough. Kendrick, do you have anything different to add to that or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say that's a worldview where the gospel transforms every aspect of life and brings in um, Christ's rule into society, the culture, and and scary enough, the government.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ooh, we don't go to that dark, shadowy place, the government.
And just to hop off that, I think that's why most people are scared of Reconstructionism, because it's applied to the civil sphere, and that can be a very unstable thing in our very divided society today. That makes us a threat. So I think that scares a lot of Christians.
Yeah. Well, so I've had conversations with Christians, and as I was telling you guys before we started recording, I am very Christian Reconstructionist sympathetic. At this point, I don't know if I would embrace the title for different reasons, but
Mhm.
hey, maybe one day I'll get there. Um, but I am definitely very sympathetic. And yet, I find that even Christians who wouldn't consider themselves Reconstructionists scare most other Christians just by saying we need to engage the culture or we need to,
Mhm.
do this political such and such thing. Um, what do you think that is? Like, why is it that Christians are so scared of politics or anything related to this?
Well, I think for the longest time we didn't have to worry about it. And this is coming from a young guy. From my life, I've always had to worry about it. But for the past generations, um, postmillennialism has been true in the US, to where we had a robust Christian culture that came from the Puritans and basically applied and was taken off. So we had a robust Christian culture, and then you have things like the Second Great Awakening, where the church just kind of gave up all of its intellect for emotional responses. And also, fundamentalism came out of that. So people kind of pulled out of society and kind of allowed the culture to tank. And the church never really came up with a positive vision for what to do at that point. It was really just, depending on the grace of God to carry us through, and not necessarily getting your hands dirty whenever society is actually going to hell around you. Um, on top of that, you have things like radical two kingdom theology, which basically just tells people to pull out altogether, don't bother with politics or with or with the governmental sphere. That's only the job of the citizen, not the Christian. So, I mean, there's a million reasons why, but I think that's how I would pinpoint it.
Yeah, and then hopping out of that at the Second Great Awakening and losing all their intellectual knowledge, claiming it to be bad. Um, they've adopted these feelings oriented arguments that the left uses and says, okay, we'll just go with that. Um, like whenever they say separation of church and state means that Christians should be completely out of the government, they just hop on those arguments and go like, well, you see, we want to we want to be in line with the culture, so let's go with that.
Fair enough. I'm sorry, Tim. You were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just thinking about that. I mean, it is radical two kingdoms, and it's like Kendrick said, kind of the leftist ideology of postmodernism, where even in the church, whatever you feel is true.
Hmm.
Which is kind of why the church just went full blown stupid on theological issues. Really a lot of it can be traced back to the Second Great Awakening, but I think now we kind of recognize the moment we're in, and people are scrambling to give a robust Christian vision for society.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so we have two different perspectives currently. You have sort of like the theonomic Reconstructionist side, and then you have the Christian nationalist side. So I do want to get into that, but before I do, one of the things that you mentioned is that Reconstructionism is to be both theonomic and post-millennial. So do you have to be a post-mill? Do you have to hold to that eschatology in order to be considered a Christian Reconstructionist?
I would say no, but I would say that it's rather inconsistent. It's sort of like, uh, please forgive me for this, but it's sort of like jamming a puzzle piece and jamming like puzzle pieces together and saying, "You see, I finished a puzzle," and then it just looks all wonky. It's I would say no, but it's just kind of it's just cognitive dissonance.
So
My bachelor's is in psychology. I'm not proud of that, by the way. But you just saying cognitive dissonance brings me back. But yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so we actually talked about this question before we came on, and me and Kendrick actually disagree on it, believe it or not.
Really?
I think you do have to be post millennial because theonomy does not work without post millennialism. You have passages that say the coastlands will cry out for the law of God. That doesn't work in a unregenerate culture. So you may be pre-mill, but I don't know how you hold those two ideas together. Um, and especially with the parables of the mustard seed and the leaven, you have this thought of the kingdom of God growing and expanding to fill the whole earth. And when that happens, theonomy comes with it, with the law of God. So I just don't see how you can hold um, another view and still be a Reconstructionist. You can be a Christian nationalist all day, and I'm willing to work with you, but I don't think Reconstruction is going to work out very
Mhm.
well for them.
You just said something that's very interesting to me. You said that the culture must be regenerate. So in order for Christian Reconstructionism to, I guess you could say, achieve its goals, you need a relatively large amount of regenerate people in the culture. Is that what you're saying?
Oh boy, this is where we're going to get in trouble, Kendrick.
Well, it's
Well,
it's it's you guys' personal thoughts. You don't
yeah,
you're
yeah.
not the Christian Reconstructionist Pope. Last time I checked, so you don't speak for
Not
all of
yet.
them.
Not yet. We will
Not
be.
yet.
I'm just kidding. But this is one of those areas where we don't agree with everything Wolf said.
Mhm.
However, a helpful paradigm he presents in his book is a top down approach. So hear me out. I know that's a controversial thing, and all the theonomists have probably already tuned me out. But you have passages in the Old Testament about Josiah, the king, tearing down the Asherah poles, and the people didn't want him to. And the people were largely unregenerate, and he did tear them down, and the culture basically went back to doing the exact same thing. But Wolf presents this cultural Christianity that basically makes people more receptive to the gospel. So if you think about, kind of the place we're in society today, once Obergefell hit, it seemed like people are less receptive than ever. And that's because top down, the laws have been catechizing the people to basically embrace degeneracy.
Mhm.
So I'm with Doug Wilson when he says he wants both. So I think in the civil sphere, the government should be pushing Christian laws that will catechize the people. And then when the church also does its job at the same time, those people are actually more receptive to the gospel as it spreads through like leaven. So a lot of theonomic guys simply want the bottom up approach, but I don't even think that makes sense with abolitionism, because you're not waiting for a regenerate culture to put that law in and to put a stop to abortion immediately. They're going straight for the top down approach, and I'm here for it. But I just think it's a little inconsistent to say it has to be only bottom up and then pursue laws like that.
To quote
Okay.
Tony, to quote the great theologian Tony Stark, I say, why not ask for both?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, guys, and maybe if you want to give me pushback on this,
Sure.
I think that I'm with you, 100%. I think it's both. Um, I think for most people, the day to day should be bottom up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think, and I understand the fears here, right? Because there are some people who say, well, what that will do is if you're doing top down instead of just bottom up, what that will do is that will make you focus more on a gospel less politics, right? And so you kind of get away from our main mission, which is to make disciples, right? To preach the
Hmm.
gospel. And I understand that concern, right? Because I see it. I see a lot of these like you're saying, a lot of the Stephen Wolf followers tend to have more of this pragmatism. And I'm not saying Joel Webben said, listen, all pragmatism isn't necessarily bad. And I agree with him. I think we differ on how much pragmatism, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes we need to be pragmatic, but we cannot be pragmatic at the expense of what we've been clearly told to do in the law of God, in the scriptures, right? And so I would say we can approach it top down secondarily because we still live in this world. We still
Hmm.
got things to do here while maintaining the priority, which is to share the gospel with our neighbors and share the gospel with our children and share the gospel with whoever is around us, right? Disciple even
Hmm.
our own church. I'm
Hmm.
not talking about just shutting the church doors and just staying inside and just discipling the people in there. No, that would be two kingdom. That would be radical two kingdom.
Hmm.
I'm definitely not for that. But in terms of top down, I think that's still in this country particular, not uniquely, but in this country in particular, I think we have an opportunity, a unique opportunity to do both. And I say, why not? As long as we keep the gospel as the main focus, which, you know, we can we can get some pushback from some other people.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think we have to remember that um, while the apostles were converting and evangelizing the common people, I mean, just everyday people, they were also converting people like people in Herod's court. I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
people like Herod's wife, I think, was one of them. Um, so I would say, what? Why not just try and go for both? I mean, we could work out the kinks either way. I mean, we could work out the kinks along the way, but why not just ask for both?
Yeah, I think you're both right, and I think it can easily become off balanced if you're strictly pursuing a political solution to the chaos around us. And I think we need to be wise and like toe that
Yep.
line between. And you're right. What most people are going to is just go around and share the gospel and interact with your neighbor day to day. But you're still required to go out and vote and hold our leaders accountable to rule like Christians, like Romans 13 tells them to.
Hmm.
Whether they're regenerate or not, that's still the standard God holds them to.
Hmm.
So what you guys are saying is that I'm 100% correct.
Yeah, sure. We'll say
Yeah,
that.
Okay, cool. Absolutely. I'm glad you guys are here to affirm me because I've been feeling really down lately and I needed that affirmation. Not that
that was
yeah, go ahead.
that
I'm
was
sorry.
that's the mission of our podcast, is to affirm people.
Ah,
That's true.
well, I'm glad you guys are here. Yeah. I mean, I knew I was right all along, of course. I don't need your affirmation, but it just makes me feel good. So,
Well, that's why you brought us on. We know it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. So here's an interesting question. So could you be a theonomist but not a Christian Reconstructionist? Is there a distinction?
Do you want to tackle this, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could. I don't think one of them exists, just to be quite honest. I don't know, again, why you would be a theonomist and not hold to postmillennialism at the same time. Because if postmillennialism isn't true, then theonomy is just not going to happen.
Hmm.
It's going to be either what the Amils say, where generally speaking, the kingdom of light and darkness kind of grow together, or it's going to be what the pre-mill says, and the culture's going to go to hell in a handbasket, and then Jesus comes back. And if either of those are true, theonomy just doesn't work.
But what if I want to fight for theonomy and I don't necessarily believe in postmillennialism? Couldn't I pull that off?
I think it would be rather inconsistent. Um, Whenever Rushdoony came up with the term Reconstructionism, he meant theonomy and Reconstructionism to work hand in hand. Um, it's it's both. I mean, they can't be separate from each other. If you if you're a if you're a theonomist, it's gonna be Reconstructionism.
Okay.
Okay, here's an interesting thought that I thought of just now. So most Christians are not post mill, obviously. They're probably pre mill. And a lot of pre mill guys are actually in the Christian nationalist camp where they want to see that at least the 10 Commandments um, enforced, right? And a lot of them are. I mean, we have you can't murder people on the books, right? It's not consistently enforced, but it's there. So a lot of people want that. And I think once you make the leap that the 10 Commandments actually summarize the rest of the law of God, theonomy is not that large of a leap from that. Um, so, I mean, I suppose you can hold to it. Again, I don't know someone who exists that does. And if they do hold to it, it would be like a band aid almost on the situation that we're in.
Yeah, it'll be like trying to hold a plane together with duct tape. You
Yeah.
know?
The reason why I ask, obviously I'm post mill, so I agree with you guys on this one.
Sure.
But um, I've seen, like for example, Vodi Bakum. Okay,
Hmm.
Vodi Bakum probably would not embrace the title theonomy, but functionally, he kind of is one.
Hmm.
And so I wonder. It makes me think to myself, like, what exactly are these people striving towards? Right? Is it because in their minds we can we can hold this together without post mill necessarily being true, or is it just we need to fight for this as long as possible, even if ultimately it doesn't work out? Do you guys know what I'm saying? Because I see it, right? Or even like you mentioned, like primos who want to be Christian nationalists, right? They fight for these things. Um, or even going back to Vodi Bakum, right? Like he did an interview with Ali Beth Stuckey, where he says, if you don't want Christian nationalism, then what kind of nationalism do you want?
Yeah.
Do you want globalism? No, thank you, please. Right? Like that's exactly
Hmm.
what he says. And so why in my mind, I'm like, you may want that, but you don't think it's gonna happen. So I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that?
I don't know. I don't know how they hold those two thoughts together, but I'm thankful that they're trying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
if you're gonna be a theonomist and don't want Reconstructionism, what are you working towards? Are you working towards I'm not sure, globalist government with theonomy? That doesn't sound right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can hear the Amil perspective where again, this is what Wolf presents in his book, and obviously I don't agree with it because I'm post mill, but he's at least trying to give a positive vision for Amils to engage the culture, which I think had been sorely lacking for a long time. But he basically says you model the earthly kingdom after the heavenly kingdom, and that's classic two kingdoms. So he's saying in the earthly kingdom, the civil realm, you're supposed to model that towards the heavenly reality. So I can see how an Amil could get there, although Wolf only argues for basically the Ten Commandments, not the rest. He's not, he addresses theonomy in his book, but it's not. It's more of a Ten Commandments type approach for him. For the pre-mill, I think honestly, it's just they don't know when Jesus is coming back, so they're going to be faithful while they can.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely appreciate brothers, whether pre-mill or all-mill. And by the way, I think in my church, as far as I know, my wife and I are the only post-mills out of the 100-something plus people that go there. So, you know, the people that attend there and are willing to engage the culture with the gospel and with the law of God, I'm like, well, you probably don't believe that's going to go very far, but I'm thankful to you that
Mm-hmm.
that you still fight for it. I guess I'm gonna have to sit down with one of them one day and just say, what are you thinking exactly, bro? Like, where are you going with all of this? So
Yeah.
I'm sure that we'll have that conversation at some point. Okay, so real quick, changing gears a little bit because I do think I want to make sure I want to be respectful of you guys' time. I don't want to take over an hour, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we get to as many questions as possible. One big question. I've heard a lot of like a Christian prince, right?
Mm-hmm.
Monarchy versus republic. What does the Reconstructionist government look like? Can we have a democratic republic? Can we have a, you know, are we looking for a monarchy? What is it that we're aiming towards?
Do you mind if I go ahead and answer this one?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I would say that it's not a monarchy. It could be it's a democratic republic. You can have it in a theonomic system, or a Christian nationalist system. It's just that um, the thread that would hold the government together is God's law. It would be you tie the whole government together with God's law. Um, it's not a king ruling over everything. It's a civil leader representing the people with the intent of having a Christian culture and applying God's law to the government.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think all the original Reconstructionists, Rushdoony, Bonson, North, I don't know, there's a bunch of them, but I think they would all probably argue for a democratic republic because they were all Christian libertarians. And they all wrote pretty extensively against statism. So it may not be a democratic republic, but they would be opposed to any system that had a large government. And honestly, if the Reconstructionists want to critique Wolf's book, that's where to go because he argues for a very large government, actually, whereas the Theonomist wants a limited government where the people are regenerate and able to self govern.
Okay. Um, would would the Constitution be necessary for a system like that?
Necessary? That's a good question. I
Depending
think
with
the Yeah, I think the Constitution, a lot of what we have today is simply derived from the Word of God. Almost a lot of it is. I mean, a basic example is "Thou shalt not murder." Well, where do you get that? Or you can't kill people. Where do you get that? That's obviously the law of God. You have court proceedings where you need two or three witnesses, right? Guess where we get that from? The law of God.
Hmm.
So a lot of it is actually derived from the Word of God. The problem with the Constitution is all the additions that we put in that haven't been derived from the Word of God, and I think that's where the problem really lies. And unfortunately, we live in a society where the Constitution. I mean, there's the arguments on Twitter on whether it's a dead document or not. I would hope that even if it's dead, that we could get it living in society again today. But I would probably the theonomists want God's law strictly enshrined into law, so that may be something added on to it. I'm not really sure what the approach would be regarding the Constitution exactly. Um, but for me, as a general equity theonomist, I see no problem with taking principles from the law of God, like the parapet around the roof of the house, and applying that to society.
Yeah,
So,
I would say that the Constitution is God's law systematized into law, so that we have, you know, the we have the idea of two or three witnesses enshrined in there. And like Tim said, yeah, it's just really the additions that came afterwards that we don't like.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the reason why I asked, just to give you some context, there is a debate, like you mentioned. Some people are saying, well, the Constitution is just horrible. On the other hand, some people say, well, the Constitution is the thing that keeps Democrats from, just fully doing what they want to do. And so there's this whole debate on, should we be a constitutional democratic republic? Should we be a monarchy? I personally lean towards, well, the whole thing that really got Israel into trouble was asking for a king.
Mm-hmm.
And so before that, they had representatives. So I think that's probably going to be a better system, considering that Christ is king already anyway. So
Yeah.
that's
So,
my thought.
yeah, I think a lot of that stems from the left already ignores the Constitution, right? So that's kind of where the dead document thing comes from, because they're saying, well, it'd be great if it was enforced and actually held to, but we have abortion enshrined into law in
Mhm.
several states.
Right.
So they're obviously ignoring the Constitution. So the question is, what does it take to get us back there? Ideally, for me, it is a democratic republic, but like, how do we get there? And that's where people start talking about the Christian Prince or the Protestant Franco.
Mhm.
They're saying, constitutioning harder isn't going to save us from the mess we're in. And they're not even saying necessarily that they want the Protestant Franco, but they're saying, I don't see another way out of this other than someone getting up there and enforcing Christianity.
Right. And that's where we get into the whole thing of like top down, bottom up,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
how do we handle these things? Yeah. And, I would say the same thing that we've been saying, which is both
Hmm.
primarily bottom up, patience, right? I think that a lot of these guys just don't have patience. Not every single one of them, but I think a lot of
Hmm.
them, and I get it, right? There's righteous indignation towards the evil of our culture in our day. And it's like, we got to do something about it. I'm like, well, yeah, I agree, but we shouldn't overstep what we've been called to do in order to do something about it, right? Preach the gospel
Hmm.
faithfully, talk to your representatives, call out the leaders, right? The very top, the presidents, the Supreme Court judge, etc. I think that's all well and good with the gospel, right?
Hmm.
With the gospel intact. Um, but I think that most change, right? If you think about the Democrats and how they got to where they got. Now, I'm not saying we should be pragmatic, but they ripped a page out of the Bible, right? Which is
Hmm.
patience, right? They were patient
Hmm.
and they were discipling. They weren't necessarily going top, starting from the top. They were starting from the bottom primarily. They still made their moves towards the top here and there.
I don't know. I actually think they did, and here's why I think so. Because even before Obergefell, it was pushed on the airwaves. Like they force fed it to us in all the media we consumed. Now you may argue that's not from the government, but I think it's all kind of one and the same at this point. I think
You
it's
don't you don't think
all.
that you don't think that it was primarily bottom up and secondarily top to bottom? You don't think so?
Yeah, it could be. I suppose it could. It's really hard to say because obviously we're not mind readers and we can't really determine where it came from. I mean, I guess if you're holding to total depravity, obviously it came from the sinful
Sure.
heart of man. But I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Where are their churches? Where are the leftist churches? Where do they disciple their disciples?
Well, you see, this would come to my answer, and I would say that it's the public school system whenever it first originated.
Yes, sir. There it
Um,
is. That was their primary target. That's
Hmm.
what I'm saying. But anyway, I think yeah, I not disagreeing with you, right? I'm just saying I think that was their primary target. They knew if I can get to the kids, to the young ones,
Hmm.
I can grow if I'm patient with enough time, I will have a generation that will support me at the top. I think, right? While still making their moves towards the top. I definitely agree with that too. But I
Sure.
think primarily they were going for which, I'm speaking for personal experience. I know the garbage that I heard in public school and in college.
Hmm.
You know, they knew it. So I don't know. I'm not trying to knock down what you're saying.
No, no, no. I mean, I think I agree. Maybe they do have a top-down approach as well, to be honest. Because even in the public schools, I mean, they took God out of it before they started. They took God out from the top down before they started
Mm,
discipling the kids.
that's a good point.
So I think it might be both,
Right.
honestly, in the situation.
Yep. All right. So, okay. I want to get into this because there might be people that are listening. We're like 40 minutes in, and they're like, "Now, wait a minute. You guys are almost using Christian Reconstructionism and Christian nationalism interchangeably."
Hmm.
So, I want to get into the differences. What do you guys think is the main difference, or even if it's a multiplicity of differences between Reconstructionism and Christian nationalism?
do you want to go ahead, Tim?
All right, I'll take it. And then we'll get in trouble with this one too.
Yeah.
So for me, the difference is right now, Christian nationalism is ill defined. It honestly has probably 20 different definitions. And Christian Reconstructionism has a very specific, focused definition. So I don't think the two contradict each other, but I see Christian nationalism as almost an ecumenical term where a various amount of views can come in and decide how they want to unite and engage the culture. Whereas Reconstructionism is very specific, and also with Reconstructionism, with theonomy, there is it doesn't have to be, but there is a globalist expectation that the whole world will be discipled, whereas nationalism is a very specific focus on the nation. And I've had theonomists actually come at me and say, "Why are you focused on nationalism? You should be focused on globalism because theonomy." I don't know if most of them would say that, but it's definitely in the air out there.
Okay. Yeah. I would I would probably agree with that. Kendrick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with Tim on that. Really, I have nothing to add. Just that I think that the strength of Christian nationalism lies in the honing of the culture towards Christian ideals. I like the cultural Christianity aspect. I'm like Richard Dawkins, where I say that I love the hymns saying, man, I never thought I would say that. Uh, where I love the hymns saying the hymn singing in the parks and all that. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. I think I agree with you guys. I do think that Christian nationalism is a lot more um, nation focused, which is interesting because Reconstructionism, in a sense, is also nation focused. Um, if you think about it, right? We're talking about
Hmm.
reconstructing our nation. Um, but it goes beyond that. Whereas nationalism is
Hmm.
just well, it's a Christian political theory, right? Where what should be our priority, specifically our nation.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Well, why do you think they come into conflict with one another sometimes?
Um,
Really? Oh,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
really? It's just methodology. Um, First of all, Wolf is sort of a Wolf is a Thomist, and well, and we faithful the Reform don't like that. You know, especially with all the James White beef and the oh, you can't, you know, he's a Thomist. How can you believe anything that he says? You know, and I would say, let's work together and let's find out what that is. You know.
Yeah, and also on top of that, people think wolves is the only definition. That's most commonly what I run into is when I say I'm a
Hmm.
Christian nationalist, they're saying you can't be that and a Reconstructionist, and they think it's because I'm agreeing with everything Wolf is saying.
Right.
But I know he's controversial, but Torba and Isker put out a book on Christian
Yes, they
nationalism
did. Yes,
that's
they
from
did.
a very post-millennial perspective. So, and that book has reached more people than Wolf's book. Wolf's book is only controversial in the reformed world where we're talking about it. Outside of that, people are going to have no clue who Stephen Wolf is. Isker and Torba, though, have a wider audience. So I would argue their definition of Christian nationalism is actually farther reaching than Wolf's is. And all that to say, I don't even disagree with everything Wolf says. There's obviously stuff I do disagree with, but we try to be fairly, eat the meat, spit out the bone with his book when it comes to these issues. So all that being said, we can work together. Wolf ultimately wants the Ten Commandments enshrined into law, and that is something that the theonomist and the Reconstructionists can work off of. Again, that's a hop and a leap from the Ten Commandments to theonomy.
Yeah, and then you have all the Owen Strand stuff. That's where a lot of animosity towards CN comes from. It's the they're kinnists, they're all kinnists. Let's burn them at
Yeah.
the stake. You have some people who don't like the Christian nationalist title because because it's unpopular. It's not
Mhm.
it. You can't make it politically relevant. You can't. I know you can't make it politically. What's the
Well,
term?
it's not the gospel.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what it comes down to.
Mhm.
So, speaking of kinism, you know, Stephen Wolf, you probably agree with Stephen Wolf more than I do. Not saying that I disagree with everything that he says, but I have some issues with
Sure,
some of
sure.
the stuff that he says. Now, I do know that he's not a kinist, or at least he says he's not a kinist. I've sometimes wondered. I'm like, are you though? Like, I'm
Hmm.
gonna take your word, but you sometimes
Hmm.
say things that I'm like,
Mm.
and I guess I'm showing my hand here, but I guess in you guys' perspective, obviously everybody knows there are some kinnists that do like Stephen Wolf,
Most
but
definitely.
Mhm.
why would you say that is?
Do you want me to answer that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of them misunderstand a lot of the definitions Wolf is running with, and Wolf doesn't always correct them when they do. And there's reasons I think he doesn't, but it is a problem oftentimes that he doesn't squash that in the camp. They don't feel like they have to condemn everyone who runs off with their work and misconstrues what they're saying or something. But Wolf has a very specific vision for Christian nationalism, which is a mono-ethnic version. Now, when people hear that, they think, "Oh, so you're saying it's just white people?" When really, historically, that's not how the term is used. It's just talking about shared culture, shared customs, things like that. That's what ethnicity historically has been used at. But in our modern culture, obviously, if you don't define that very well, people are going to easily misunderstand what you're saying.
Yeah. It used to be in America that oh, I'm an American, no matter where you came from. Now it becomes, oh, I'm a Mexican American, or I'm a Russian American. and we get that a lot, but we don't realize that they're bringing their worldviews into that country, and that's what Wolf is primarily going against, is that America is being torn apart because we have so many ideologies that we can't form a cohesive unit. Um, the Mexican brings well, the Mexican brings the Catholic worldview in there, which cannot which Catholics cannot deal with a representative government. The Islam, I know people
Muslim.
from people from Afghanistan bring bring Islam into there and into the country they're migrating to, and they basically they try to form counties with Sharia law. That's what Wolf is fighting against.
Well, and on top of that, beyond religion, there are cultural things that do not assimilate well into a mono-ethnic culture. And when we hear that, we can't really picture it. But there's examples kind of all over the place of how assimilation is hard. And even in America today, we're kind of required to assimilate as Americans to people actually coming in the country. We're expected to know other languages, to be respectful to customs we probably don't understand as Americans. And a lot of them aren't even first world customs, oftentimes. People come from third world societies and don't necessarily know how to assimilate. And we understand this in places like France, where people are being murdered and raped in the streets because a lot of immigrants are being allowed in without necessarily being assimilated or um, being deported after these things happen. So it's probably a controversial thing to say, but it actually makes a lot of sense if people can just pause and actually think about it.
Okay. So, well, Christian nationalism is looking for a mono-ethnic culture, which makes sense, right? I've been describing something called proto-culture, whether it's first culture versus multiculture, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not for multiculturalism. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that we should just be a blend of a bunch of different cultures. That sounds like a mess, right? Like I'm all for a primary culture, and if there are aspects of other cultures that blend into our society, I'm okay with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like I'm not quite multicultural, but I'm not quite monocultural. So I do think there should be a primarily American American Christian culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Um, for example, I love tacos, right? Fantastic
Sure.
stuff. I'm good with that. Or, I love the respect that Asian Americans tend to have towards other people more so than other cultures, right? I think that's something we can bring in. So there are aspects of other cultures that I think can work here. And so that's why I say I'm not necessarily monocultural. I'm open to the good things that align with Christian culture. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense? Um, with that said, so Christian nationalism is probably less open to that kind of thing, right? Um, what about
Maybe.
Reconstruction? Maybe depends on
Mm-hmm.
the Christian nationalist, right? Because I would
Mm-hmm.
consider myself a Christian nationalist according to the statement on Christian nationalism, not so
Sure.
much on the Wolf's book
Mm-hmm.
on the case for Christian nationalism. But I want to bring this to Reconstructionism. Can there be other religions or other cultures under Reconstruction? There a Christian Reconstructionist system?
You want to take this one?
Sure. Um, Basically, I would say yes, that there can be other religions, but they would not be, it would be private worship. It would not be open, and we would not have a uh, sponsored mosque like we do right now.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that would be my answer. So,
Yeah, I
Okay.
generally agree with that. In a Christian nationalist government or a Reconstructionist government, there would be no public calls to prayer for Muslims. That would not happen in a Christian society. You're free to worship in private, and the government doesn't have the right to put cameras in your home to make sure you're being a good little Christian. Um, no, but there, when you come into a Christian nation or a Christian society, you are required to assimilate into that to recognize we have Christian laws, we have Christian society. You're welcome to come here and practice your religion in private, but this is the culture you're assimilating into. And we
Mhm.
understand this with Israel because God actually had pretty clear commands not to intermix with pagan cultures, but they were still to be respectful to the foreigner,
Foreigner.
and the foreigner would assimilate into Israel's culture.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I just want to clarify something. If somebody's listening to this and they are thinking, "Oh, these guys want to mix church and state," I don't think that you guys are saying that at all. I'm certainly
Mhm.
not saying that. We do believe, hopefully, all of us here believe in sphere sovereignty, right?
Yes.
We do agree with the separation between family, church, and state. Those are different spheres.
Mhm.
We just wouldn't necessarily agree that the family, the church, and the state can't be separated from God and his
Mhm.
standards for each one. Would you
Yeah, and
guys
I don't
agree?
even think yeah, the founders wouldn't have even agreed with that definition of church and state. When America was founded, there were state churches. That doesn't even make sense in the context of the
Mm.
founders. So yeah, it's just I think Christians need to stop saying that, to be honest, because I don't
So,
think
what do you think is the right context of separation of church and state?
well, honestly, I think it's the state needs to stay out of the church. That's the appropriate context. But even on top of that, like, okay, you have people like Dusty Devers, right? And this
Mhm.
is where it gets a little foggy because he's a pastor and he's also is he a senator? Is that what he is?
He's an Oklahoma state senator. Yep.
Yeah. So obviously he's functioning in two different roles. And I can see why someone would argue that's intermixing church and state, but I would argue he's simply functioning as one man in different spheres without intermixing them. And we understand this biblically. I mean, Romans 13, God has clear commands for how a government ought to function, and it's in submission to Him. They ought to punish the evildoer, and they ought to uphold righteousness. This is God's standard. So if you're saying the separation of church and state, I'm not sure you're approaching this issue from a biblical perspective.
Kendrick, any other thoughts that you want to add to that, or we're good?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I I just think it's wrong to just use separation of church and state just to say that pastors should not be in the government sphere.
Mhm.
Very good. Agreed. All right, guys, we're coming up on an hour here, so I'm gonna wrap it up with this question, and I'll allow you guys to tell us, where we can find you if anybody doesn't know about you guys. So, what are some common objections to Christian Reconstructionism, and how would you respond to them?
Do you want to
Uh,
take turns?
yeah, sure.
Just bring out a
Okay.
whole list, like that Chris Jericho meme where he just
Yeah,
rolls out.
we honestly could.
Mhm. One common objection is you guys want a theocracy. Well, first of all, I would say what's wrong with that, but
You're doubling down.
but I would obviously say, look, we want that. We're not saying that we throw out the Democratic Republic. We're not saying that we have a pastor in chief. I'm saying that what we're saying is that we want the Bible to be. We want God's law to string together the whole governmental system. We want theonomy.
Mhm. Yeah, and on the theonomist route, but I hear, and I even hear this with Christian nationalist arguments, is, well, how'd that work out for Israel? That's one I hear all the time. And I'm like, okay, but Israel actually it wasn't the law that was the problem in Israel. It was the people that
Right.
were the problem. So you may argue a bottom up approach from this argument. That's fine. But the problem was that people were rebellious towards the law of God. The law is perfect and good and came from God, and it is still perfect and good and comes from God. So the problem is the people failing to live up to that standard, not that we shouldn't uphold the standard. That's just an absurd argument.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and you guys already made it clear your general equity. So it's not
Mhm.
like you're saying, well, we need the exact civil laws of Old Testament Israel, right?
Yeah.
We don't
Mm.
want anybody watching this video and then misrepresenting you guys because I know you guys are watching. I know there's a couple of you guys looking for clips right now. No, 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 no. They already set their general equity. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah,
So,
and to hop off that, like the parapet on the roof, like that doesn't make sense in American context where we're not hanging out on our roofs, right? But it makes sense in a context where a child will run into a pool and drown. Put a fence around your pool so that doesn't
mm,
happen.
Mhm.
This is
right.
how you extract the general equity from that law. And Wolf actually addresses that in his book, that exact thing, and says, "Well, this is why we need building codes." Um, so there's principles to extract out, and it's silly to even have an argument against it from, well, it didn't work for Israel. So
Mhm.
Exactly. Exactly. We're simply trying to extract the moral principles that scripture teaches and
mhm,
just say, hey, the only good law is the one that's going to be according to God's standards, right?
mhm,
God's principles, God's law. That's all we're saying. Um, you would think that that would be so simple for a Christian, right?
mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
well, can we have a subjective law over here, or should we see what God has to say about that particular issue?
Yeah.
But I digress. All right, guys. So I appreciate you guys taking the time. I know we're a little bit over time, so I apologize. But real quick, if somebody wants to follow you guys, where can they find you?
Yeah, so we're on mostly Facebook. That's where most of our audience is. We're on Twitter. We don't do a whole lot on Twitter though, so it is what it
Mhm.
is. But our podcast is on Spotify and Apple. So if you want to listen to us, that's where to check us out. We start our next season soon. It'll be next month, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going over gender roles, which is a topic that's been covered a million times, but you can't really address deconstruction without addressing that. So
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, guys, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being here.
thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great. And for you guys watching, I hope this was edifying to you. I hope it was helpful to you. Maybe it answered some questions you had about Reconstructionism, theonomy, or even Christian nationalism. If you have any questions, follow questions, whatever it might be, make sure to comment below. Give it a like if it was helpful. Until next time, God bless you guys. Take care.